Welcome. It is a real pleasure to have such a wonderful audience here tonight for Carmen Ramos's talk. I'm Virginia Mecklenburg. I'm the chief curator of the Smithsonian American Art Museum. So it is my pleasure, and has been my pleasure now for 3 years, to work with Carmen. But before I actually tell you a little bit about her, one of the special things one gets to do if one has the mic is to thank the people who make everything that we do possible. Tonight, there's sort of a lovely confluence. It is a very, very special pleasure to thank the Smithsonian's Latino Center, whose board actually met here today. So we welcome you, we welcome the artists, but especially we want to thank the Smithsonian Latino Center for many years of support, financial support certainly for the exhibition, but really, maybe even more important, the kind of moral support and encouragement that has come as we have tried to launch a significant national program that will give the Latino voice a central presence in American art. I also especially want to thank Altria, which is our corporate sponsor for this exhibition. There are a number of other very special friends who have helped, some of them through support for the show, many others by supporting the acquisitions that the show is bringing to light this time. Carmen has made an absolutely extraordinary effort in the now, 3 years and 1 week that you have been with the Smithsonian American Art Museum to build a collection, or to begin to build a collection, because we're by no means finished yet, but to build a collection that is considerably more representative and broadly based than it ever has been before. So we are grateful to the artists, we are grateful to the donors of artworks, and we are grateful to the artists' family who have made possible an exhibition that brings, I guess, more than half of the works in the show are new acquisitions within the last couple of years. This is very special for us. Dr. E. Carmen Ramos is not just a colleague. Carmen has become a very special friend. Our offices are next door, so we get to spend time together. Carmen, as I said, joined the staff of the museum 3 years ago, just in October of 2010. She's been responsible for acquiring a lot of artworks, conceiving of a program that will make the Latino voice, as I say, central within the canon of American art. She came to us with remarkable expertise. We felt very fortunate that she was willing to leave her home in the New York area and move to Washington. We're the burbs down here compared with New York, certainly, but to undertake this initiative for us. Before she came here, Carmen did a project called Blackout, a centennial commission by Paul Henry Ramirez. It was a site-specific installation at the New York Museum. She also did a powerful show called Cut, Build, and Weld, Process and Works by Chicano Booker at the Visual Arts Center of New Jersey in Summit. She's organized exhibitions about Mexican popular arts. She's done shows of works by Franco Mondini Ruiz and Freddie Rodriguez. Freddie, are you here tonight? It was fun. There you are. It was fun to meet you last night and have a chance to talk. And she's also served as curator of exhibitions for the Arts Council of Princeton at the Paul Robeson Center for the Arts. And, if that were not enough, assistant curator for cultural engagement at the New York Museum. Carmen came not only with remarkable expertise as a curator, but she brings incredible intellectual prowess to our midst. She did her bachelor's degree at New York University, and then went on to do a master's degree and a doctorate in the history of art at the University of Chicago, which is one of the, as you all well know, one of the most prestigious universities in the country. She's an accomplished writer. She's written a number of exhibition catalogs. She has published articles in a number of magazines, and has done sort of consulting writing for places like El Museo del Barrio. She is a star. So we are really, really pleased to have her star in our firmament. Carmen, thank you.
Thank you. What a nice introduction. Can everyone hear me? Okay. Up until the mid-20th century, it was common for scholars of American art to pose a question to the likes of, what is American about American art? Answering this question allowed early Americanists like Lloyd Goodrich, the former director of the Whitney Museum of American Art, to self-define the unique cultural milieu of a former European colony and to pose their ideas about the common denominators that united American artists. For contemporary curators and scholars, this question is now utterly passé, for few believe in the existence of an unchanging set of American characteristics in the visual arts. The title of my talk, What is Latino about American Art, harks back to this past, along with a wink and a poke. Not only because this question has rarely been asked, but because the juxtaposition of Latino and American exposes a gap in the ways in which we traditionally think about our national culture. As the first named curator for Latino art at the Smithsonian American Art Museum, to be charged with the serious task of expanding and interpreting the museum's pioneering collection of Latino art, I constantly return to this relationship and ask myself, what are my and our institutional goals? In building our Latino collection and in organizing exhibitions to interpret it, are we trying to define the essence of Latino culture? Is it even possible to singularly crystallize the expansive field of Latino art, which encompasses works by artists who are native-born citizens, immigrants, descendants of incorporated populations, exiles, or as Latinos are more routinely called, Mexican Americans, Chicanos, Puerto Ricans, Cuban Americans, Dominican Americans, and beyond? As I set about my task, I consciously sought to capture the expansiveness of the field, not only in terms of the varied cultural backgrounds of Latino artists, but also their sprawling aesthetic and conceptual range. The sampling of works gathered in Our America are a testament to the unbounded nature of the field. It reveals that Latino art can encompass the deceivingly straightforward works of Carmen Ramos that document and reflect upon Chicano daily life, the activist and formally compelling graphics of Juan Sanchez that confront the ambiguous political status of Puerto Rico, the avant-garde performances and media interventions of the conceptual Chicano group Asco, the romantic melancholy of Ileana Emilia Garcia's photographs that suggest the emotional ties that bound an immigrant to her native country of birth, and the spare sculptures of Jesse Amado, which engage the legacy of minimalism from what the artist considers a personal perspective. Ever aware that permanent collections define the parameters of a given field, I knew that I didn't want to build a collection or organize an exhibition that emphasized a narrow concept or that packaged Latino art into a neat little category. Rather, my goal was to highlight a critical perspective on Latino art, a field whose most salient common denominator is that it is often not integrated into the narrative of American art. My deliberate purpose was to stake a fundamental yet ambitious claim for Latino art right here in the nation's capital. While the Smithsonian as a whole has global collections and initiatives, it is also an eminently national institution whose efforts are wedded to notions of our collective national patrimony. The Smithsonian American Art Museum in particular is not just any museum, it's the National Museum. And taken at face value, this idea can conjure the narrowest or most inclusive expectations of what should be housed within its walls. I've asked myself this question many times. How best to frame Latino art in this hallowed national context? These observations led me to ponder both the roots of the category of Latino art, as well as popular conceptions about our national culture. Historically speaking, Latino art and related terms emerged in the late 1960s through the 1980s as political statements and as terms of solidarity uniting artists of related cultural and historical experiences against the exclusionary practices of American cultural institutions. For instance, during this period in New York, artists began to advocate for the greater representation of works by African American, Latino, and women artists in the collections and exhibitions of major American museums. It was within these contexts that terms like Black and Puerto Rican art, and by extension Latino art, came to reference not only rich fields of cultural production, but also underrepresented facets within the category of American art. I also consider that in the United States, we commonly critique notions of ethnic identity for being restrictive, and wondered whether we do enough to question what counts as American and who is considered an American artist. This is an important question for a field with a plethora of museums and publications that bear its name. When we ask these questions, it becomes clear that the history of American art, as told through museum collections, exhibitions, and key texts, remains deficient of Latino participants and protagonists. The exhibition, Our America, therefore, embarks from the simple assertion that Latino art is an integral part of the art of the United States. This declaration is not meant to deny the transnational nature of Latino art that bounds it to the history of Latin America. It does not seek to downplay the disruptive current of much Latino art that opposes singular views of American culture. It does not advocate that we return to a closed vision of national culture that disregards past and present global realities. Rather, it calls attention to the underemphasized and rich connections between Latino art and the national context in which it was born. On the one hand, the affirmation that Latino art is American art is simply a fact. Latino artists are American by birth, citizenship, residence, education, and even sacrifice, a factor made clear by the large number of artists that have served in the U.S. Armed Forces. On the other hand, the statement poses a challenge to the ways in which we traditionally think about what constitutes American culture. Our America urges us to not only affirm that Latino art is American art, but to ask and answer how and to what effect it is part of this national category. Taking this step requires that we see Latino artists not as isolated figures solely embroiled in an intergroup conversation amongst themselves, but as peers dialoguing with other American artists and their national context. When positioned in this national light, it becomes clear that Latino artists shape and participate in the artistic movements of their day, tackle questions and themes tied to American national identity, and probe our popular culture, often but not exclusively, from the perspective of Latino experience. In fact, there are many individual Latino artists who worked alongside their American peers well before the category of Latino art was established, yet their careers remain absent from the annals of American art. Painters such as Cuban-born Carmen Ramos, for example, produced abstract works in keeping with her times. Herrera moved to the United States in 1939, and following a sojourn in Paris, she returned permanently to the United States to become a participant in the New York avant-garde. Her geometric abstractions, marked by bold, angular forms piercing through space, would anticipate later developments of hard-edged minimalism and op art. During the 1950s and after, Herrera befriended some of the leading post-war abstractionists, such as Mark Rothko and Barnett Newman. By including Herrera's works in our collection, we are finally able to stage what may be the first real-time museum encounter between her work and that of her US-based peers like Ellsworth Kelly, another American artist who was also drawn to Paris after World War II. Puerto Rican-born Olga Albizu, on the other hand, first embraced abstraction on the island, and then continued in New York, where she studied with Hans Hofmann, the German émigré artist who had a decisive impact on mid-century American art. In joyous works like Radiante, Albizu worked with a handful of colors in a single canvas to stage what she called a conversation between color and form. Her intense color palette conveys that, like other abstract expressionists, she believed in the emotive power of color. Albizu's works are recognized worldwide, since her canvases grace the covers of several jazz albums, including the bossa nova classic Gez Gilberto, yet she too is not incorporated into the history of mid-century American art. A great deal of my collecting efforts have focused on artists like Herrera and Albizu, who worked in the post-World War II era. While this is not the beginning of Latino art, it is at this historical juncture that Latino art starts to get labeled as such, first through specific categories such as Mexican American and Puerto Rican, and increasingly through the umbrella category of Latino. This naming happens for at least two reasons. One, it is during the mid-century period that Latino artists are increasingly educated in American art school. And two, in part motivated by Latino service in the military during and after World War II, Latino communities began to question their marginalized position in American society, as well as the prevailing melting pot discourses that shaped our vision of American culture. My research reveals that in many cases, these factors started to merge, and that Latino artists began to inflect the movements and themes of American national identity with new perspectives drawn from Latino experience. You see this kind of merging in El Tamalito del Hoyo, an early painting by Roberto Chavez that pictures a young boy from his own Los Angeles neighborhood. After his military service in the Korean War and with funds made possible by the GI Bill, Chavez studied at UCLA and eventually helped launch a brand of expressionistic painting associated with Los Angeles in the early 1960s. In his early works, Chavez used this style to animate his portraits, some of which captured Mexican-American subjects, like this young boy named Tamalito. Chavez depicts the subject wearing high waters, army surplus boots, and donning a grayish skin tone similar to the sidewalk upon which he stands. Tightly caught between the top and bottom edges of the canvas, El Tamalito, with his big eyes and round cheeks, conveys the innocence of youth, whereas his ambiance, complete with graffiti-scrawled urban walls, suggests a specific place and time. Behind him, a dilapidated structure and white picket fence counters the hope of the American suburban dream we so associate with the decade of the 1950s. The painting at once communicates the individual personality of this young boy, as well as the social conditions in which he lived. While artists like Chavez depicted people and places from their immediate environment, other Latino artists delve into the annals of national history to create works that question established versions of American history, especially events that have shaped Latino experience. Many Latino artists are drawn to the 19th century, a period that witnessed American Western expansion across the continent and the rise of the United States as an imperial power. The appropriation of lands following the Mexican-American War not only advanced the goals of Manifest Destiny, the belief that the United States was destined to control most of North America, it also converted residents of Mexico's northern frontier into American citizens overnight. Even though their status as citizens was ratified as part of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo of 1848, the experience of Mexican-turned-American populations in the Southwest runs counter to their new citizenship. Historian Vicky Ruiz has summarized that Mexicans on the U.S. side of the border became second-class citizens, commonly divested of their property, political power, and cultural entitlements. For these and other reasons, many historians mark the moment of westward expansion as the beginning of the Mexican-American community, a history that remains marginalized even in revisionist accounts of the West. Artistically speaking, Western expansion was visualized through extensive photographic portfolios by artists such as William H. Jackson, who captured majestic vistas of recently acquired lands that largely excluded traces of earlier residents of this region in favor of works that depict an empty frontier waiting to be inhabited, tamed, and developed. In Jackson's photograph, only the title of the work, which includes the word cañón, complete with the Spanish letter ñ, suggests these earlier residents and history. Contemporary landscapes by photographer Delilah Montoya contest these empty historic scenes to tackle the myth of the West. Taken on the border between Arizona and Mexico in 2004, her photographs themselves resort to empty landscapes, yet they too suggest the trace of another history. Montoya's works initially began as an effort to raise awareness about the humanitarian crisis along the U.S.-Mexico border. This photograph captures the activities of Humane Borders, a nonprofit group that legally places water tanks along the desert to prevent migrant deaths from dehydration. As the project unfolded, Montoya became increasingly aware of the complexity of life in the region. In Desire Line's Babaquivari Peak, Arizona, she shot a view on the Tejano Reservation, whose lands and people are divided between the state of Arizona and the Sonora region of Mexico. Sonora-based Tejano peoples become border crossers when attempting to enter their ancestral homeland. Montoya worked closely with one tribal member, seen on the left, who scatters water jugs along the reservation's border. In the distance, the hazy outline of the Babaquivari Mountains, the site of Tejano creation myths, attests to the history embedded in this land. In a region so historically and politically complex, clear notions of native, migrant, insider, and outsider are morally difficult to navigate. Puerto Rican artists, both on the island and mainland, have explored the relationship between Puerto Rico and the United States, a relationship that was also cemented in the 19th century. Puerto Rico became a U.S. territory at the end of the so-called Spanish-American War of 1898, when the island was ceded to the United States by Spain. Since then, the relationship between the island and the United States grew increasingly complex and negotiated through several congressional acts that established the island's ambiguous political status as an unincorporated territory that is now considered a freely associated state or commonwealth. Since 1917, Puerto Ricans are born American citizens, yet island residents cannot vote in federal elections. Over the course of her lengthy career, Meza Baynes has examined Puerto Rico's unique landscape to affirm the island's independent political identity. In Platanal, she focuses her gaze on a field of plantain trees, a crop that since the Spanish colonial period has been wedded to concepts of Puerto Rican sovereignty. A key accoutrement of the jíbaro, or Puerto Rican peasant, the plantain appears in iconic paintings such as Our Daily Bread by Ramon Frade, which depicts a humble farmer whose straw hat functions like a halo. Rather than focus on the plantain as the daily bread that literally sustains island residents, Baynes deploys the icon to assert a sense of place that she can appreciate as an island insider. Baynes relishes in the surface beauty of the plantain leaves as they reflect the tropical sun, and delights in her use of paint on an unprimed canvas. In the end, Baynes displays a willful intent to look, depict, and therefore possess the land on her own terms. These examples reveal that Latino artists not only adopt canonical genres like the landscape to open up marginalized chapters in our national history, they also engage historical events from the Mexican-American War to the Spanish-American War and beyond that paved the way toward the establishment of immigrant and migrant Latino communities in the United States. The idea that we are a nation of immigrants, to use the title of President Kennedy's 1963 book on the subject, is a foundational and complex pillar of our national imaginary. As many of you know, there are exceptions to this truism, which includes Native Americans who are indigenous to this continent, African slaves and their descendants who did not voluntarily migrate, and as we've already explored, Mexicans in the Southwest prior to 1848, and Puerto Ricans, both of which were incorporated populations. Despite the fact that the vast majority of Americans have immigrant roots, it is uncommon to find studies in American art that engage this subject head-on. Here, too, there are some exceptions, like the Golden Door, which was the first major exhibition to explore the work of immigrants who arrived as artists in the United States or who became artists as they matured into adulthood. The exhibition included works by Joseph Stella, the first so-called Italian-American artist, whose ambitious canvases, like Brooklyn Bridge, married the scale and arch compositions of Italian altarpieces with the modernity of New York. The Golden Door exhibition often recounted the harrowing personal experiences of artists who arrived amidst political and social turmoil in Europe, yet didn't necessarily present their work as bicultural. The subject of immigration, therefore, remains a ubiquitous yet invisible topic within American art history. Latino artists, on the other hand, directly engage the subject of immigration, its social, historical, and political causes, as well as its impact on individuals and communities. In part, this stems from the fact that Latino artists emigrated in an era marked by technological advancements, from the telephone to airline travel and the World Wide Web, that allows individuals to stay linked to their culture of origin that was simply not possible in the past. They are also attracted to the subject because for many, their own immigration is recent history. To use the terms of sociology, many Latino artists are first-generation Americans or 1.5ers, a phrase that refers to those who emigrate as adolescents. Cuban-American artists like Maria Brito and Arturo Rodriguez fit into this 1.5 category. They immigrated to the United States in their teens in the wake of the 1959 Cuban Revolution that prompted the exodus of thousands of Cubans who did not support the government of Fidel Castro. For these artists, immigration has meant exile or being severed against your will from your native country of birth. These artists often turn to allegorical or surreal imagery to conjure the emotional and psychological rupture of migration. Brito's large assemblage in El Patio de mi Casa, or in the backyard of my house, powerfully juxtaposes the past and the present. On one side, a cradle that nestles a planter holding a small tree with exposed roots rests on top of an ominously cracked floor. On the other, the artist palpably recreated her humble kitchen, complete with personal mementos like photographs and symbolic objects like a face mask that looks like a layer of peeled skin. Both sides contain references to water, plants, and nature, suggesting the possibility of spiritual renewal through the passage of time. Like Brito, Arturo Rodriguez's Untitled transports viewers to a place that is at once beguiling and inhospitable. Beautifully rendered in red, blue, and green brushstrokes, the painting includes 3 figures, including one whose head faces backwards, all which stand, sit, or walk through an environment that lacks a stable ground. These and other works convey that Latino artists are not only driven to make visible the specificities of their migration stories, but that they wrestle with finding the appropriate artistic strategies to explore the subject on the level of content and form. For example, Sherazade Garcia's lushly combined paintings and drawings are inspired by her interactions with Dominican Yorkers, or Dominicans from New York. Central to her work is drawing, a medium conducive to spontaneously capturing the willful and hopeful motivations that spur migration. Antonio Martorell's large-scale prints were inspired by historic snapshots of Puerto Rican migrants, either laboring in factories or taking respite in New York City's tar beaches, the rooftops of tenement buildings. In merging these two sources, the artist captures the lives of anonymous Puerto Rican laborers who fueled the U.S. economy and supported relatives back on the island, often mailing back home their Sunday best rooftop portraits as evidence of their economic betterment. In Tar Beach 1, a fashionable woman wears a fur-colored coat and sits in front of the New York City skyline. Her hard-working double sits to her left, completely engrossed in her job as a seamstress. To depict migrant laborers, Martorell himself resorts to the laborious technique of woodblock carving. For other artists, their own migration leads them to open up history and explore the global flows of people and cultures that have traversed the Americas since European colonization. For Maria Magdalena Campos Pons, seen here on the left in a 1994 performance, her migration to the United States brought her into contact with African American artists who challenged conventional representations of Black culture. As she settled in a country with its own African diaspora community, Campos Pons increasingly began to see herself as part of a global African diaspora. Her anguished separation from Cuba additionally started to resonate with the historic break between Africa and its dispersed descendants in the Americas. Constellation, the work in our collection seen on the right, comes from an ambitious Polaroid series that references Blackness in an evocative way. 16 photographs arranged in a grid present fragments of the artist's hair seen against painted environments that evoke the sky, a body of water, or a map. The central 4 panels depict her head from above, and the surrounding photographs record locks or balls of hair at different ranges of proximity and distance. Here, Campos Pons takes an often malign marker of African ancestry, black hair, and turns it into a metaphor for cultural resilience. Like a constellation in the sky, viewers can see the whole composition and its individual parts, an idea that resonates with the dispersed yet culturally connected links that bind the African diaspora. Dreamlike and visually fractured, the work evokes the rupture of slavery and exile and the ability of the imagination to bridge the gaps of time and space. It was, however, the tumultuous historical period of the 1960s and early 70s, what we now consider the Civil Rights era, that drew Latino artists decisively into the American political and cultural sphere. The massive mobilizations for equity and social justice were a response to the African American civil rights movement, the anti-war, labor, and international student movements, all of which spurred the quest for civil rights and full cultural citizenship. Galvanized by the times in which they lived, Latino artists became masters of socially engaged art, challenging what many considered the social detachment of reigning American art movements. Latino artists reinvigorated mural and graphic traditions in an effort to reach ordinary people where they lived and worked. In this way, Latino artists not only chronicled a turning point in American society, they actively shaped history. For many artists, the activism of the United Farm Workers was an important point of departure. Emmanuel Martinez, for example, created the altar upon which Cesar Chavez broke his highly publicized 25-day fast in 1968. Like this ceremonial object, many of the posters in our collection have a specific story behind them. In 1973, Javier Viramontes created this poster in support of the United Farm Workers Union. That year, Chavez had initiated a new grape boycott in reaction to the violent intervention of the Teamsters in the California labor struggle. Esther Hernandez's masterful Sun Mad energized the critique of hazardous labor conditions among farm workers by merging the recognizable sun-made logo with the Mexican calavera or skeleton, an icon grounded in Mesoamerican culture, popular tradition, and the visual satire of the 19th century graphic artist Jose Guadalupe Posada. Younger artists like Margarita Cabrera have taken the classic Chicano theme of labor in directions responsive to our changing times. Her soft sculptures would take on the appearance of toasters, blenders, and other domestic objects, began with her discovery that many of the appliances used in American homes were assembled in maquiladora factories, or assemblage plants, located across the US-Mexico border. Unlike the pristine new products sold to the American consumer, Cabrera's life-size replicas of common appliances bear the trace of her own laborious process. In lieu of the plastic components that are manufactured in Mexico, Cabrera uses vinyl, a synthetic product that also resembles skin. Their languid shapes sag as if they're about to collapse under their own weight. The string used to bind the vinyl is left long and exposed, making the objects appear hairy and unkempt. Cabrera's anthropomorphized sculptures reference Mexican labor that ironically supports middle-class lifestyles in the United States. Rather than focus on the plight of the domestic factory worker, a dwindling figure in a society where practically all goods are made in either China, Korea, Mexico, or elsewhere, Cabrera shifts her attention to the U.S. consumer who purchases products manufactured under harsh working conditions. As these examples reveal, Latino artists participate in a major thematic thread in American art: labor. From images of toiling slaves and sharecroppers in 19th century American painting to depictions of the heroic worker in Depression-era art, labor has been an ongoing subject in the history of American art. Working on behalf of civil rights, Latino artists, however, sought to disrupt rather than uphold the status quo. They not only represented laboring people, but sought to galvanize them and the public to take political action. Even as Latino artists were active during the Civil Rights era, they have continued to create works that since that period reflect on it as a turning point in American history. In the 1980s, Frank Romero turned to the death of Rubén Salazar, an event that galvanized the Chicano community to continue to press on for their civil and human rights. Salazar was an accomplished Los Angeles Times journalist who had chronicled the rise of the Chicano civil rights movement. His celebrated essay, "What is a Chicano and What is it that Chicanos Want?" was one of the first to define the term Chicano as a Mexican-American with a non-Anglo image of himself. On August 29, 1970, Salazar was covering the Chicano moratorium, a major anti-war Vietnam demonstration. After the largely peaceful protests, Salazar retired with his crew to the Silver Dollar Cafe, a local East Los Angeles bar. Reports of an armed disturbance sent deputies to the scene, including one who shot a tear gas projectile into the bar and that hit and killed Salazar instantly. No one was ever prosecuted for the killing. Salazar immediately became a martyr, memorialized in posters, prints, plays, and corridos, or folk songs. Romero's monumental Death of Rubén Salazar does not transcribe the events of August 29, 1970, so much as offer his perspective on the incident's historic significance. Here, Romero collapses several moments in time to posit the experience of injustice as a defining element of Chicano identity. In the center midground, 5 deputies with firearms march in unison toward the bar as one of them shoots ammunition that explodes on the roof. To the left, a money exchange store named in part Casa de Cambio offers a Spanish-language pun. Literally translated as House of Change, it calls attention to the ultimate objective of the moratorium, Salazar's writing, and the continued activism since his death. The nude women painted on the bar's facade refine the imagery that actually decorated the exterior of the Silver Dollar. Romero represents the Boulevard Theater adjacent to the bar, even though it was located several blocks away. The marquee announces a fictional Spanish-language film, La Muerte de Rubén Salazar, suggesting that the event will be memorialized in the future. 2 vintage lowriders parading down the street hark back to the 1940s, the era of the infamous Zoot Suit riots that saw many incidents of police and public brutality against young Chicanos in Los Angeles. Even as Romero's painting undoubtedly recalls both Mexican and Chicano muralism, its narrative subject and large scale also link it with the tradition of history painting that reflects upon pivotal events that shaped American history. While Latino artists routinely engage American history, they are even more drawn to popular culture as a source and sign of the changing nature of American life. It is important to point out that many Latino artists came of age during and after the heyday of pop art, and like their peers, they too turned their attention to media and consumer culture. Yet for Latino artists, the popular connoted much more than the tried and true symbols of the USA. Rather, they embraced a broad sweep of popular references and approaches, from interventions in the media and public space to vernacular immigrant traditions and imported icons. Like African American artists such as Joe Overstreet, who challenged the stereotype of the mammy, Latino artists also gravitated to the intersection of race and American consumer culture. Disparaging representations of Latinos and Latin Americans had long been part of American popular culture, especially films, which featured Mexican banditos and over-the-top characters like Carmen Miranda's Brazilian Bombshell. Since the late 1940s, American corporations such as Frito-Lay and Chiquita brands echoed these representations in their advertising and popular packaging for Latino-related foodstuffs like corn chips and bananas. In the early 1970s, at the same time that Chicano activists were lobbying to remove the Frito Bandito from public circulation, Mel Casas painted the stereotypic mascot for Frito-Lay corn chips as a centerpiece for his Humanscape 62. In fact, it was this promotional giveaway, a green Frito Bandito pencil eraser, that inspired Casas' painting. In the mid-1960s, Mel Casas initiated his Humanscape series as a means to explore the psychological impact of mass media imagery. The series was instigated by the artist's surreal encounter with a drive-in movie screen, a source suggested by the large central screen-like image found in each Humanscape installment. In number 62, Casas united a series of trivialized and meaningful brown, quote-unquote, brown references drawn from American and indigenous cultures. On the left, right, and center, Casas depicts a stoic Native American presented in profile, a group of unassuming Native or Mexican American women wearing textiles, and a junior Girl Scout or Brownie. Near the center foreground, in front of a double-headed serpent, a green-colored Frito Bandito, modeled after the eraser, rides the shoulders of a skeleton. These latter figures refer to actual Mesoamerican objects. The double-headed snake represents the Aztec deity Quetzalcoatl and is based on a jade pendant in the collection of the British Museum. And the skeletal figure resembles a gemstone statuette in a German collection that represents Xolote, the deformed twin of Quetzalcoatl. Such incongruent juxtapositions simultaneously critique the trivialization of Chicano culture and allude to the rich culture's stereotypes obscure. Casas was not alone in debunking stereotypes through ironic juxtaposition. In 2002, Azal created a sculpture and video that literally deconstructs West Side Story, the classic 1961 film that widely introduced Puerto Ricans into American popular culture. West Side Story was set in New York City among Puerto Ricans and white ethnic gangs. The film presented Puerto Rican characters as criminals and spitfires, all the while superficially treating the poverty that spurred Islanders' migration to the mainland. The video, which is embedded in the suitcase, interweaves distorted, blurred, and upside-down film clips from West Side Story with documentary photos of Puerto Rican migrants, pointed quotations by the Nuyorican poet Pedro Pietri, and footage of mambo dancers in New York City. Adal's carefully constructed montage uncovers how West Side Story was not only inspired by the explosion of the Puerto Rican migration, but also indebted to the Latin jazz and mambo boom centered in New York's Palladium Ballroom. For other artists, the simple act of documenting Latino life challenged media stereotypes. Sophie Rivera, for example, used her camera to capture glimpses of the Puerto Rican community of New York at a time when critics and activists spoke out against the book and later film Fort Apache, the Bronx. In her two Untitled Portraits feature Puerto Ricans who traversed New York City. Rivera sought out her subjects by standing outside of her building and asking passers-by if they were Puerto Rican. If they answered yes, she invited them into her studio and photographed them against the wood-paneled background. The size of the printed photographs, each is 4 feet square, monumentalize their subjects and magnify details. The sitters present themselves in a dignified and unsentimental way. The man's eyes are sunken, and he looks slightly pale and weathered. Barely visible beneath the collar of his shirt, is a beaded necklace that suggests he may be a practitioner of Santeria, an Afro-Cuban faith. The young woman has carefully styled her hair after Farrah Fawcett's famed feathered and flipped hairdo. Unlike traditional portraits, which often identify sitters by name, Rivera's subjects remain anonymous, even to her. By visually revealing her subjects in great detail and simplicity, yet leaving them unnamed, Rivera allows viewers to reach their own conclusions about who these individuals are. Looking to the everyday allowed artists to also discover the aesthetic possibilities rooted in Latino life. Artists like Amalia Meza Baynes, for example, retooled vernacular Latino traditions like altar making. Based in the San Francisco Bay Area, she was at the center of a broad cultural reclamation project aimed at valuing the rich dimensions of Chicano culture. Meza Baynes started creating commemorative altars and offerings born out of her study of Day of the Dead and devotional traditions cultivated by women. Some of her early altar installations, like An Ofrenda for Dolores del Rio, seen here, paid tribute to historical figures such as Del Rio, the striking Golden Age movie star who appeared in more than 50 films in Hollywood and Mexico. The work takes the form of a chapel-scaled altar and also resembles a woman's vanity table, whose elements are placed in a niche, draped in billowing pink fabric. The impression is one of reverence and awed admiration for an actress who captivated audience from the 1920s until her death in 1983. For Meza Baynes, Del Rio was a strong female figure with which Chicanas could identify, and also a vehicle for her own meditation on beauty and aging. The artist's ample use of mirrors on the bottom tiers of the installation implies these multifaceted dimensions. The mirrors represent both female beauty rituals and the self-affirming effect of Chicanas seeing a movie star that resembles them. Meza Baynes' affirmation that Chicana domestic practices like altar making are a valid form of art making parallels the efforts of feminist artists such as Miriam Shapiro, who reclaimed the forms of women's material culture, like quilt making, as the basis for her own art. Miguel Luciano, alternatively, has focused on the ways in which imported symbols accrue new meanings in a different context. He turned to the plantain, a quintessential and complex icon that can also allude to race in Caribbean and now U.S. popular culture. Caribbean popular expressions link the plantain's phallic shape with male virility. The stains which plantains can leave on hands and clothes of those who handle them often stand as a disparaging metaphor for the stain of blackness. Luciano observed that for Latino youth in the United States, the icon of the plantain functions like a valued badge of pride, a resistant emblem that proudly announces their cultural roots. His bejeweled plantain visualizes how the meaning of symbols change through migration. By fashioning an object that assumes the bling-bling guise of hip-hop culture, where platinum jewelry is a sought-after commodity, Luciano further calls attention to the ways in which Latinos continue to shape this vibrant form of American popular culture. For these reasons, Luciano's consumerist fantasy suggests the cultural and political dimensions of buying extravagant things is nuanced in a different way than Jeff Koons' iconic stainless steel rabbit, a work that comments on the excesses of 1980s extravagant consumerism. Our America showcases that the forms through which artists engage imported cultural traditions can range from the representational to the abstract. Freddie Rodriguez, who immigrated to the United States from the Dominican Republic in 1963, created these syncopated, non-objective works to evoke the pulse of Latino music. Arriving at the youthful age of 18, Rodriguez studied in New York, where he was drawn to Mondrian's jazz-inspired works and the shaped geometric canvases of younger artists like Frank Stella that he encountered at the Museum of Modern Art. Painted in the early 1970s, these three works were created during a time when Caribbean migrants in New York birthed salsa, a musical form born of an amalgam of Cuban, Puerto Rican, Dominican, and US-based rhythms, and was recorded by new record labels like Fania. What is striking about these paintings is their intense physicality, evoked by titles such as Danza Africana that refer to dance. At 8 feet tall, these slender paintings are close to life size, and their crisscrossing lines suggest the movement of dancing couples. One of the canvases even depicts fleshy colors like pink and dark beige. These works affirm the strong African foundation of Caribbean music and also communicate that some musical traditions are not simply meant to be heard, but experienced through the body. I want to end with a work that I believe embodies the multidimensional goals of our America. Maria's Great Expedition was created by Cristina Fernandez and relays the life story of Maria Gonzalez, the artist's great-grandmother and the first member of her family to migrate from Mexico to the United States. To construct her story, the artist interviewed relatives, studied American and Mexican history, and photographed herself assuming the guise of her great-grandmother at key moments in her life. The final presentation takes the form of a museum installation about the discovery and settlement of North America. It includes a map outlining Maria's movement from Mexico through several southwestern states, imagined photographs of Maria, as well as a detailed narrative that interweaves fragments of her life within a larger view of American history from 1910 to 1950. Each photograph and accompanying text reveals how Mexican Americans helped build the American West. The first installment in the story, titled 1910, Leaving Morelia, ties Maria's decision to migrate to the unrest caused by the Mexican Revolution and the growing demand for cheap labor in the United States. The related photograph portrays a young woman looking outside the picture frame as if she were contemplating her future. In Colorado, we learned that Maria supported her growing family by providing food and lodging to European immigrant miners. By the time Maria moves to Boyle Heights in Los Angeles in the 1940s, we learned that her sons participated in the World War II effort and that Mexican-American and African-American workers filled labor shortages caused by the internment of Japanese Americans and rising military enlistments. Maria's individual yet complex story offers a remarkable picture of the overlapping relationships between national and group histories. Like the larger spirit that propels our America, Maria's Great Expedition marks a deep historical presence and exposes absences in our national imaginary. It reveals these absences by offering clues that it is a present-day intervention in the historical past. The protagonist, for example, who's impersonated by the artist, never ages over the 40-year history. Some pictures are sprinkled with present-day references, like a 99-cent store flyer. Most significantly, each picture takes on the shifting photographic conventions of 20th century American photography. The picture, 1930, transporting produce, for example, looks like a period photograph that documents the lives of struggling Americans during the Depression. These self-reflective strategies not only allow Fernandez to pointedly insert Mexican-American history where it has been left out, they also convey that all histories, whether familial, group, or national, are constructed. The need to document this history as late as 1996, when Fernandez completed this project, speaks to the work that remains to be done to construct a fuller picture of the American experience. I hope that the exhibition Our America allows our viewers to understand that the American experience we so often conjure is not composed of a single narrative, but a series of stories and perspectives that can exist simultaneously or in tension with one another. Our Latino collection invites visitors to ponder the Latino American experience as made manifest by the artists who have long been active in the history of American art. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. You're too kind. Thank you. Thank you. Well, we have time for questions, so I look forward to hearing questions that any of you may have. We have 2 microphones on each side. The lecture is being webcast, so we appreciate if you speak from the microphone so that our off-site viewers can hear your questions. you want to go over there and, right there?
That's a pretty large audience. I'm sort of sad because I came here yesterday at 2 o'clock with both my sons, and we were asking where the auditorium was for the lecture, and we were asking where the Chicano art show, this Latino art show, was supposed to be held at, and they told me, oh, it don't start till tomorrow. The preview, it don't start till tomorrow at 7 o'clock, 6 o'clock. And so we took off, spent the whole day running around all L.A., because some of my friends from from work, they said they wanted me to paint all the sites, photograph all the sites, so I could paint them in the Mexican Chicano style, or all the varied ways in which I do things like Chicano Park, all the things that we did over there. Mm-hmm. And so I'm saying, okay, we'll do it. So we spent all day walking all over the city. Whew. Wow. Must have been 10, 15 miles. It was a lot of work. Really got
sorry
tired.
that happened. Do
Yeah,
you
know
do
what?
you have a question?
I felt really sad, but when I found out that you were still here, that this thing was here today, I felt a little better. Having the opportunity to be able to show you what I've done in the last 41 years. We have a little teeny tiny piece here when I was just a little kid, but there's so much work. What you've just shown there is just incredible, because all the people that I grew up in Chicano and who were in East LA, right there after they killed Salazar, and we were starting to move in there, and then from there I come to San Diego, back to San Diego where I live, and everybody was telling me, oh, aren't you the famous Jose Cervantes from East LA in those days? Sure, that's me, yeah. What do I? They say, hey, would you like to join us here in San Diego? Become part of the, help us paint murals in Chicano Park. They already had a name for it, Chicano Park. So there's just so many stories that you've yet to tell. Everywhere I went, when we started painting in East LA, we started painting bus benches, and we eventually started bringing graffiti off the walls and having people paint. And then we went to San Diego, and this one day, the guys were already painting, let's go. And everybody looking at each other said, what's the problem here? How come nobody's doing anything? I said, where's the sketch? They said, what sketch?
Well, I look forward at the end of the, of the lecture to look and talk more about
So what I'm trying to say is, I'm surprised there's so many people here. I'm just sad I missed yesterday, but just having the opportunity to be here, there's just so much out there. There's just so many people that I knew in my life. They're not even recognized, and you're just barely starting to
I've got a question here.
scratch the surface,
Okay. Well, thank you. Yes, the question.
Well, I'm delighted that there's so many people here. And my question is, what projects are you thinking about doing next after this overview show of Latino art?
Well, I'm actively thinking about a lot of different things. This exhibition includes the work of 72 artists, so I'm really interested in working with fewer artists. It was a very big initiative, so I think that the direction for the museum, as I tell everyone, is that we need to treat Latino artists the way we treat other artists. So we need to see more solo exhibitions, more focused group exhibitions. Our efforts with this exhibition was really, as I said, to point out a direction that I hope that we can continue to take. And I think that we need to embrace that through various different exhibition strategies, like solo shows, focus exhibitions. So I'm thinking along those lines.
Carmen, if I could, first of all, congratulations. It's wonderful to have an intellectual history and perspective of American Latino art. I guess my question to you is, how do you deal with the theme of Latinos in the U.S., considering all the different aspects, and then art from South Americans, from Mexico, Diego Rivera, all the famous artists from that perspective? Are there themes that are intertwined? Is it a matter of influence, or is this in your view, an art that is now expressed or specifically separating itself from the from other South American art and traditions?
I think that I often think of Latino art as having two parents, if you will. One parent is American art, and another parent is Latin American art. So I think it is related to both. And there have been many exhibitions, more exhibitions that look at the relationship between Latino art and Latin American art than there have been exhibitions that look at the relationship between Latino art and American art. And I think many Latin American scholars and curators have been more willing to embrace the diaspora in their formulation of various national art histories. There's still a long way to go, but it's in comparison to what's happened in the United States, actually the Latin Americanists are doing a better job at incorporating Latinos into that narrative. So I think that there are relationships. There are, clearly there's been a connection between Chicano muralism and the activism of the 1960s and 70s, and Mexican graphics and Mexican muralism, and there are more and more scholars that are really looking at that relationship in a very deep and scholarly way. And I think we need to continue to deepen our understanding of that relationship beyond just saying it was an influence, but how exactly was it an influence? So I think that there is a relationship, but I think also you have to look at a lot of figures on a case-by-case basis. What happens to Latino artists as they become second, third, fourth, fifth generation Americans? How are they going to view themselves? Are they still going to be interested, in the culture of their great-great-great-grandparents? So I think the future is unclear in terms of what that relationship would be.
Carmen, speaking about Latino artists, is it possible to recognize and introduce some of the artists that are here today with us?
Oh, that would be wonderful, yes. Well, the ones that I've seen, Joseph Rodriguez is here. Okay. Jose Cervantes is here. Freddie Rodriguez is here. Okay. Adal is here. Ileana Emilia Garcia is here. Sheresade Garcia is here, although I'm not sure where she's sitting. There she is. Okay. Esther Hernandez is here. I think Maria Brito is supposed to be here. Yes, there she is. I don't know if Arturo Rodriguez is here. Oh, there he is. And I don't know if I've forgotten anyone. So. Oh, Martorell, Antonio Martorell. Okay. Miguel Luciano. Oh, where's Miguel? Okay. Oh, Marcos Timas. Okay. Muriel Hasbun. Okay. Manuel Acevedo. Where's Manuel? Manuel. Okay. Is that everybody? Okay. Mm-hmm. Yes. See what I grew up with. Any other questions? Well, thank you for coming out, and I hope that you enjoy the show. Okay.